8 years, 3 jobs, 1 abandoned college degree. I paid the rent, covered the bills, and helped put my husband through medical school until he became a celebrated surgeon. Then he sat across from me in divorce court and told a judge I had contributed absolutely nothing to his success. He thought I was too broke, too forgotten, and too powerless to fight back. What he didn't know was that a hidden trail of money, a signed promise he never expected anyone to find, and 1 transfer connected to another woman were sitting inside a single envelope on the judge's desk. By the time Judge Eleanor Hayes finished reading it, the story Ethan Mercer had spent years building about himself was already falling apart. My name is Celeste Rowan, and this is the revenge he never saw coming. Chapter 1. The first thing I noticed was Ethan smiling. Not a big smile, just the corner of his mouth lifting for a second as he sat across from me in a family courtroom in downtown Chicago. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they already know the outcome. He looked exactly like the successful doctor everyone admired. Tailored navy suit, expensive watch, perfect posture, calm confidence. The man I had spent nearly a decade believing in. The man who now wanted a judge to believe I had contributed almost nothing to his success. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the polished wood table between us. My palms were damp. My stomach hurt. I had barely slept the night before. Richard Sloan, Ethan's attorney, stood and addressed the court. He spoke with smooth confidence. My client is a highly respected cardiothoracic surgeon. He has built an exceptional career through years of education, discipline, and professional excellence. I heard every word. Built, his, career, through, his effort. The words landed like stones. Richard continued speaking. He described Ethan's income, his professional reputation, his future earning potential. Then he turned toward me. Mrs. Rowan has no advanced degree, no professional credentials, no significant career history. Her contribution to Dr. Mercer's current success is limited. Limited. I stared at the table. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the last 8 years of my life. The double shifts, the missed birthdays, the aching feet, the nights I came home after midnight and woke up before sunrise. According to the story being told in that courtroom, none of it mattered. Richard sat down. Ethan adjusted his cufflink. That tiny smile appeared again. He believed this would be easy. He believed I had nothing. Then Olivia Bennett stood, my best friend since high school, the woman sitting beside me, the lawyer who had spent months helping me rebuild myself after my marriage collapsed. Your Honor, I would like to submit additional evidence for consideration. The room became still. Richard frowned. Ethan looked confused for the first time all morning. Olivia handed me a large sealed envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I stood. I walked toward the bench. Judge Eleanor Hayes accepted the envelope and opened it. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. She removed the first document, read, turned the page, read again. At first, her expression revealed nothing. Then her eyebrows lifted. A few moments later, she paused completely. Her eyes moved back to the first page, then to another document. Then she looked directly at Ethan. The silence stretched. I saw the confidence leave his face. Only a little, but enough. Judge Hayes continued reading. I could not tell which document she had reached. I could not tell what she was thinking. Neither could Ethan. For the first time that morning, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And suddenly, I was no longer sitting in that courtroom. I was 22 years old again, back when none of this had happened. Back when Ethan and I shared a tiny apartment near the west side of the city. Back when success felt like a dream instead of a weapon. The apartment was small enough that we could hear each other from every room. The kitchen barely fit 2 people. The heating system made strange noises every winter. The bathroom door never closed properly. I loved it anyway, because Ethan was there, because we were building something together. The day he received his medical school acceptance letter remains one of the happiest days of my life. He burst through the apartment door waving the envelope. "I got in! I actually got in!" I jumped off the couch and wrapped him around. We laughed, we cried, we ordered cheap takeout we could barely afford. That night, we sat on the floor surrounded by paperwork and possibility. Everything felt achievable until we started calculating the cost: tuition, books, housing, transportation, insurance. The numbers seemed endless. The student loans covered part of it, not enough. Every calculation ended the same. We were short, very short. For weeks, we searched for alternatives. More loans, scholarships, part-time work. Nothing solved the problem. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table staring at spreadsheets. His shoulders looked heavier than I had ever seen them. Maybe I should defer a year. I looked up immediately. What? Maybe I wait, save money first. No. Celeste, we can't make this work. We'll make it work. How? Neither of us spoke. The answer arrived before I wanted it to. I knew exactly what needed to happen. I just hated it. The next morning, I met with an academic advisor. 3 days later, I withdrew from my communications program. When I carried the paperwork out of the administration building, I sat alone in my car for nearly 20 minutes. I kept staring at the signature at the bottom of the page, my signature. The document felt temporary, a pause, not an ending. I told myself I would return soon, 1 year, maybe 2. Then Ethan would graduate and everything would be easier. That was the plan. I found full-time work almost immediately. The hours were long, the pay was modest, but every paycheck felt like another brick in the future we were building together. Whenever doubt appeared, Ethan made it disappear. He thanked me constantly. He told everyone how lucky he was. He kissed my forehead before leaving for class. He called during lunch breaks. He never let me forget that we were a team. On the morning I started my first full-time shift, Ethan walked me to my car. The sky was still dark. The city had barely started waking up. I remember the cold air and the smell of rain. Ethan pulled me into his arms. "I know what you're giving up for me." I shook my head. "It's temporary." He held me tighter. "I'll never forget what you're doing for us." For us. Those 2 words meant everything back then. I smiled, climbed into my car, and drove toward the first day of the life that would eventually change both of ours forever. Chapter 2. The alarm started ringing at 4:30 every morning, and before long, my body stopped waiting for it. Most days I woke up a few minutes early, staring into the darkness of our apartment while Ethan slept beside me. For a few quiet seconds, I would forget how tired I was. Then reality returned. Another shift, another bill, another day closer to the future we kept promising each other. The grocery store opened before sunrise. By 6 o'clock, I was already scanning items, smiling at customers, and pretending my feet did not hurt. When my shift ended, I usually grabbed something cheap to eat in my car before driving across town to the diner. The diner was loud, crowded, and endlessly busy. Coffee cups clattered. Orders flew across the kitchen. Customers complained about everything from cold toast to slow service. I learned how to smile through all of it. Then, after the dinner rush, I headed to an office building outside downtown where I cleaned conference rooms and empty hallways until nearly midnight. By the time I got home, Ethan was often still studying. Medical textbooks covered every available surface. Flashcards littered the coffee table. His eyes always looked exhausted. Mine probably did too. One night, I dropped onto the couch and closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, Ethan was kneeling beside me. "You fell asleep sitting up again." I laughed weakly. "That impressive, huh?" "Not really." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because one day we're going to laugh about all of this." I wanted to believe him. So I did. Months turned into years faster than I expected. The strange thing about sacrifice is that it rarely feels heroic while you're living it. It feels repetitive. It feels ordinary. It feels like saying no to yourself over and over again. No new clothes, no vacation, no weekends, no extra spending, no school, especially school. that part hurt more than I admitted. Sometimes during my lunch break, I would scroll through social media. Former classmates posted graduation photos, first jobs, promotions, engagement announcements, master's degrees, new apartments, new cities, entire lives moving forward. Meanwhile, I was memorizing employee schedules and calculating how many overtime hours I needed to cover next month's expenses. I told myself it was temporary. I repeated it so often it became a prayer. Temporary, temporary, temporary. One evening, I was washing dishes after work when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from a former classmate. She stood in a cap and gown, holding a diploma and smiling at the camera. "Congratulations," I typed. "Thanks. What about you? Are you finishing next year?" I stared at the message. Then I locked the phone without answering. When Ethan came home later, he immediately noticed something was wrong. "Bad day?" "Just tired." "You always say that." "Because I'm always tired." He sat beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he took my hand. "I know this hasn't been easy." "We're okay." "No, listen." He squeezed my fingers. "I mean it. I know what you're doing for me." I felt tears threatening to surface. "Don't start. If I cry, I'm never stopping." He smiled. "Then don't cry." A few months later, Ethan received news that changed everything. He had been accepted into one of the most competitive residency programs in the region. I still remember the excitement in his voice when he called me. "Celeste." "What happened?" I got it. For a second, I forgot where I was standing. The grocery store disappeared. The customers disappeared. Everything disappeared except his voice. "You got in?" "I got in." I screamed so loudly that 2 customers turned around. That night, we celebrated with takeout Chinese food because it was all we could afford. Neither of us cared. We sat on the living room floor laughing and making plans, real plans. For the first time in years, the future felt close enough to touch. At one point, Ethan leaned back against the couch and smiled. "When things settle down, you're going back to school." I laughed. "Sure I am." "No, seriously." Ethan pointed at me. "I'm serious. You sacrificed enough. The second we're financially stable, you're finishing your degree." "Promise?" "Promise." I believed him without hesitation. That might have been my biggest mistake. Residency changed Ethan. Not all at once, not dramatically. At first, it was subtle enough to ignore. Longer hours, more stress, less sleep. Any spouse would understand those things. I certainly did. Then came the conversations. He talked about surgeons I had never met, department heads, hospital administrators, investors, researchers, people who seemed to exist in an entirely different universe. One night, we attended a dinner hosted by the residency program. I spent nearly an hour choosing what to wear. Nothing felt right. Everything looked cheap. When I finally stepped into the living room, Ethan glanced up from his phone. "That's what you're wearing?" The question caught me off guard. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing." The pause said otherwise. "Just different from what?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Never mind." The comment stayed with me all evening. After that, little things started accumulating. Comments about my clothes, comments about my hair, comments about how people presented themselves professionally. Never cruel enough to start an argument, just enough to leave a bruise. At the same time, a new name began appearing in almost every conversation. Victoria Ashford. Victoria thinks this hospital will expand soon. Victoria knows someone on the board. Victoria says the research division is growing. Victoria thinks this. Victoria believes that. Victoria understands that. At first, I barely noticed. She was simply another colleague, another person from his professional world. But gradually, her name appeared everywhere. One Saturday morning, I asked casually, "Who is Victoria exactly?" Ethan looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean? You mention her a lot." "She's just a colleague." "Just?" He laughed. "She's smart, that's all." Then he returned to his screen. Conversation over. Months later, Ethan completed another major milestone. Everyone celebrated him. Faculty praised him. Colleagues congratulated him. Mentors spoke about his future. I stood in the background watching, smiling, applauding, supporting, invisible. Nobody asked what I did. Nobody asked how we got there. Nobody even seemed curious. Near the end of the evening, Ethan was invited to a networking event hosted by the hospital. The following week, I asked what time we should leave. He looked confused. Leave for what? The event. Silence. Then came a smile I didn't recognize. I don't think you'd be comfortable there. For a moment, I simply stared at him, and for the first time since the day I left college behind, I felt something cold settle quietly in my chest. Chapter 3. The feeling refused to leave after that conversation. I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. People changed, careers changed, life changed. Maybe Ethan was exhausted. Maybe residency had burned him out. Maybe becoming a surgeon required sacrifices I simply did not understand. For several months, I clung to those explanations because the alternative terrified me. Then Ethan finished his training. The day he officially completed his fellowship should have been one of the happiest days of our marriage. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. The hospital hosted a celebration dinner for graduates and newly hired physicians. Everyone shook Ethan's hand. Senior surgeons praised his future. Department heads discussed opportunities waiting for him. I stood beside him, smiling until my cheeks hurt. Nobody asked who I was. Nobody asked how long we had been married. Nobody asked how we got there. One administrator even assumed I worked for the catering company. I laughed politely and corrected him. Ethan heard the exchange. He said nothing. Not one word. The silence hurt more than the mistake. A month later, he accepted a position at one of the largest medical centers in Illinois. The salary was higher than either of us had imagined back when we shared that tiny apartment. For the first time in years, money stopped controlling every decision. I thought everything would finally change. One Saturday morning, I sat across from Ethan at breakfast. The sunlight poured through our kitchen window. My coffee had gone cold while I gathered the courage to ask a question I had waited years to ask. So, he looked up from his tablet. So? I've been researching universities. His expression remained neutral. Okay. I was thinking maybe I could finish my degree. A pause. Not a long one, just long enough. Now? I laughed nervously. Not tomorrow, but maybe next semester. He returned his attention to the screen. We should talk about it later. The conversation ended before it began. Weeks passed, then months. Every time I mentioned school, Ethan found a reason to postpone the discussion. Too busy, bad timing, financial planning, future investments. The excuses changed, the outcome never did. Meanwhile, his lifestyle transformed rapidly. The old Honda disappeared. A luxury German sedan appeared in the driveway. The modest wardrobe he once owned slowly vanished. Custom suits replaced department store jackets. Expensive watches appeared. Designer shoes. Private club memberships. Every promotion seemed to bring another layer between us. One evening, I opened a credit card statement while organizing paperwork. The charge caught my attention immediately. A steakhouse downtown. Nearly $400. I frowned. Ethan and I had not eaten there. When he got home, I asked casually, "Did you take clients out?" He loosened his tie. "What?" "The restaurant charge." "Oh." For a second, something flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. "Work dinner." "Anyone I know?" "Just colleagues." I nodded. The answer sounded reasonable, yet something still felt wrong. The strange moments began accumulating. Text messages arriving after midnight, phone calls taken in another room, meetings added to his calendar without explanation, last-minute schedule changes. When I asked questions, the answers became shorter, more distant. One night, his phone lit up while he was in the shower. Victoria Ashford, the name appeared across the screen. A simple message. Running 15 minutes late. See you there. Nothing inappropriate, nothing definitive, nothing I could challenge. Yet my stomach tightened anyway. When Ethan emerged from the bathroom, I mentioned it. Victoria texted. He barely reacted. Okay? You're meeting her tonight? It's work. At 10 o'clock? He grabbed his keys. Not every job ends at 5. The front door closed before I could respond. After that, Victoria seemed to exist everywhere. At dinner, in conversations, in stories from the hospital. Sometimes I wondered if Ethan noticed how often he mentioned her. One evening, we sat watching television when he suddenly laughed. What? Victoria told the funniest story today. Another evening, Victoria thinks the hospital will expand into research. Another, Victoria says physicians who understand business have the best opportunities. Eventually, I asked the question I had been avoiding. Why does her opinion matter so much to you? Ethan looked irritated immediately. It doesn't. You talk about her constantly. Because we work together. That's not what I mean. He sighed heavily. You always assume the worst. I'm asking a question, and I'm answering it. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the evening. The argument felt unfinished because it was, like everything else between us. The distance continued growing. The most painful part wasn't another woman, not yet. The most painful part was becoming invisible. At hospital functions, people surrounded Ethan. Doctors, executives, investors, administrators. They discussed medicine, business, leadership, growth. Nobody ever included me. At first, I tried participating. Then I stopped. Eventually, I learned my role. Smile. Chapter 3. The feeling refused to leave after that conversation. I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. People changed. Careers changed. Life changed. Maybe Ethan was exhausted. Maybe residency had burned him out. Maybe becoming a surgeon required sacrifices I simply did not understand. For several months, I clung to those explanations because the alternative terrified me. Then Ethan finished his training. The day he officially completed his fellowship should have been one of the happiest days of our marriage. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. The hospital hosted a celebration dinner for graduates and newly hired physicians. Everyone shook Ethan's hand. Senior surgeons praised his future. Department heads discussed opportunities waiting for him. I stood beside him, smiling until my cheeks hurt. Nobody asked who I was. Nobody asked how long we had been married. Nobody asked how we got there. One administrator even assumed I worked for the catering company. I laughed politely and corrected him. Ethan heard the exchange. He said nothing. Not one word. The silence hurt more than the mistake. A month later, he accepted a position at one of the largest medical centers in Illinois. The salary was higher than either of us had imagined back when we shared that tiny apartment. For the first time in years, money stopped controlling every decision. I thought everything would finally change. One Saturday morning, I sat across from Ethan at breakfast. The sunlight poured through our kitchen window. My coffee had gone cold while I gathered the courage to ask a question I had waited years to ask. So, he looked up from his tablet. So? I've been researching universities. His expression remained neutral. Okay. I was thinking maybe I could finish my degree. A pause. not a long one, just long enough. Now? I laughed nervously. Not tomorrow, but maybe next semester. He returned his attention to the screen. We should talk about it later. The conversation ended before it began. Weeks passed, then months. Every time I mentioned school, Ethan found a reason to postpone the discussion. Too busy, bad timing, financial planning, future investments. The excuses changed, the outcome never did. Meanwhile, his lifestyle transformed rapidly. The old Honda disappeared. A luxury German sedan appeared in the driveway. The modest wardrobe he once owned slowly vanished. Custom suits replaced department store jackets. Expensive watches appeared. Designer shoes. Private club memberships. Every promotion seemed to bring another layer between us. One evening, I opened a credit card statement while organizing paperwork. The charge caught my attention immediately. A steakhouse downtown, nearly $400. I frowned. Ethan and I had not eaten there. When he got home, I asked casually, "Did you take clients out?" He loosened his tie. "What?" "The restaurant charge." "Oh." For a second, something flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. Work dinner. Chapter 4. The next morning felt unreal, like waking up inside someone else's life. The candles had burned themselves out some time after midnight. The flowers still sat on the table. The untouched cake remained exactly where I had left it. Everything looked normal. Nothing was. For 3 days, Ethan barely contacted me. A brief text about collecting clothes, an email regarding bills, nothing else. 8 years together had been reduced to logistics. I stopped sleeping properly. Food lost its taste. I spent hours sitting in silence, replaying every conversation from the past 2 years and wondering where everything had gone wrong. The worst part was not losing Ethan. The worst part was questioning whether my life had mattered at all. One afternoon, a courier delivered a large envelope, his divorce proposal. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it with shaking hands. The numbers inside made my stomach drop. A modest settlement, minimal support, language that suggested Ethan had built his success independently, language that treated me like a temporary inconvenience, not a wife, not a partner, certainly not the woman who had sacrificed nearly a decade helping him reach that life. I read it 3 times. Each version hurt more than the last. That evening, I called Olivia. "I need help." "You finally read it." "How did you know?" "Because you sound angry instead of heartbroken." For the first time in days, I almost laughed. "Can you come over?" "I'm already on my way." An hour later, she sat across from me at the same table where Ethan ended our marriage. She read every page carefully. Then she placed the documents down. "This is ridiculous." "So I'm not crazy?" "No." She leaned back. "He's pretending you contributed almost nothing." "Maybe that's what he believes." Olivia shook her head. "Belief doesn't matter. Evidence does." That sentence changed everything. Evidence. Not feelings, not memories. Evidence. The following weeks became an investigation. Olivia approached the case like a prosecutor assembling a trial. Every bank account, every lease, every payment, every document. Nothing was too small. One Saturday morning, she arrived carrying 3 storage boxes. "What are those?" "My weekend." Inside were years of financial records, receipts, tax returns, bank statements, utility bills, credit card histories. We spent hours sorting papers across my living room floor. By evening, my head hurt. Olivia looked energized. "I found something." "What?" She held up several statements. "Look at these deposits." I studied the documents. Every month, every year, the same pattern. My income paid most household expenses throughout Ethan's education. Rent, groceries, insurance, utilities, transportation, nearly everything. The realization hit differently when it existed on paper. I had always known what I contributed. Now I could prove it. A few days later, Olivia uncovered another layer: the apartment leases. Every address, every renewal, every signature. Mine, again and again. The legal responsibility had belonged primarily to me, not Ethan, me. He had focused on school. I had carried real life. Olivia smiled. That's two. Two what? Two problems for your future ex-husband. For the first time since the divorce began, hope appeared. Then things became interesting. One evening, Olivia called sounding unusually excited. You need to see this. I drove straight to her office. She pushed a stack of printed emails across the desk. Old messages, years old, messages I barely remembered. I started reading. There was Ethan thanking me for covering rent, another thanking me for extra shifts, another thanking me for helping him stay enrolled. Then I reached one message and froze. I read it twice, then a third time. Olivia, I know. The email had been sent during Ethan's second year of medical school. The wording was simple, honest, unfiltered. I could not have continued without you. Everything I achieve belongs to both of us. One day I will repay every sacrifice you have made for me. My throat tightened, not because of the promise, because once upon a time, he had truly meant it. That email directly contradicted everything he was claiming now. The man in those messages acknowledged my contribution completely. The man seeking divorce denied it entirely. A week later, Olivia discovered something even bigger. I arrived at her office to find documents spread across the conference table. She looked up immediately. Do you remember the emergency during Ethan's third year? Of course I remembered. Tuition costs had increased unexpectedly. Loan processing had been delayed. For several terrifying weeks, he risked losing his enrollment status. I had solved the problem by taking out a private personal loan, $52,000, the largest financial decision of my life. What about it? Olivia slid a document toward me, the loan agreement, then another, then another. I stared in disbelief. Attached to the original paperwork was a signed repayment acknowledgement. Ethan's signature sat clearly at the bottom. My pulse accelerated. He signed this. Yes. He actually signed it. Yes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Years ago, I had filed the document away and forgot it existed. Now it looked priceless. Legally, strategically, emotionally. It changed everything. Olivia smiled slowly. This is very bad news for your future ex-husband. I laughed for the first time in months. Unfortunately for Ethan, we weren't finished. Several weeks later, Olivia uncovered the final piece, the piece neither of us expected. A transfer, $95,000, originating from marital funds, sent to a company connected to Victoria Ashford. At first, I assumed there had to be an explanation. A business investment, professional consulting, something legitimate. Then additional records surfaced: text messages, emails, written confirmations discussing the transfer. Clear evidence, clear authorization, clear intent. The room became silent as I finished reading. Olivia folded her arms. Still think this case is simple? I stared at the documents, at the numbers, at the messages, at years of truth hidden beneath Ethan's carefully constructed version of reality. No. My voice sounded steadier than it had in months. Weeks later, I found myself back inside that courtroom, back across from Ethan, back listening as his attorney tried to minimize my existence. Except, this time, I wasn't afraid. Olivia stood and presented each document methodically. The financial records, the leases, the emails, the loan, the signed acknowledgement, the transfer, the messages confirming the transfer. One layer after another, one contradiction after another. With every piece of evidence, Richard Sloane's confidence faded. With every page, Ethan looked less certain. Then, Judge Eleanor Hayes reached the final documents inside the envelope. The courtroom fell silent. She finished reading, closed the file, and lifted her eyes toward Ethan. The look on her face made my heart begin to pound, because for the first time since this nightmare started, I knew she finally saw everything. Judge Hayes removed her glasses and placed them carefully on the bench before speaking. The silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than anything I had experienced during the entire divorce. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even Richard Sloane remained perfectly still. Judge Hayes folded her hands. The court has reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties. Her eyes shifted toward Ethan. The evidence presented by Mrs. Rowan demonstrates a substantial financial contribution throughout the duration of the marriage. I felt my pulse hammering inside my chest. The court further finds that Mrs. Rowan sacrificed significant educational and professional opportunities in order to support Dr. Mercer's career advancement. Every word felt unreal. For years, I had questioned whether my sacrifices mattered. Now, someone with authority was saying they did, publicly, officially, without hesitation. Judge Hayes continued, "The argument that Mrs. Rowan provided little meaningful contribution to the marital partnership is not supported by the evidence." Across the room, Ethan stared forward without blinking. His confident expression was gone. The man who entered the courtroom believing he controlled the narrative now looked like a stranger trapped inside someone else's story. Then Judge Hayes addressed the financial records, the rent payments, the household expenses, the loan documents, the signed acknowledgement, the transfer connected to Victoria Ashford's company. One by one, she dismantled every claim Ethan's attorney had made. Richard Sloane attempted several objections. None changed the outcome. Finally, the judge reached her decision. The courtroom seemed to disappear around me. I heard only fragments at first: reimbursement, marital assets, compensation, distribution, support, recognition, justice. Then the full meaning settled in. The court ordered repayment of the loan. The transfer involving marital funds would be included in the property division calculation. Additional financial compensation would reflect the professional opportunities I had surrendered during the marriage. I closed my eyes, not because of the money, because someone finally acknowledged the truth. When I opened them again, Ethan was staring at the table. For the first time since I met him, he looked small, not physically, emotionally. The version of himself he had spent years creating had collapsed inside a single afternoon. The self-made success story, the brilliant surgeon who conquered every obstacle alone, the man who owed nobody anything, gone. Judge Hayes dismissed the hearing. People began gathering documents and leaving. The noise slowly returned to the room. Conversations resumed. Chairs moved. Doors opened. Life continued. I remained seated. Olivia squeezed my shoulder. "You okay?" I laughed through unexpected tears. "I think so." "You won." For a moment, I considered the words. Then I shook my head. "No." She looked confused. "No?" "I got my life back." A small smile appeared on her face. "That's even better." Across the courtroom, Ethan finally stood. For a second, I thought he might approach me, apologize, explain, say something. Instead, he simply walked away, and for the first time, I did not follow him with my eyes.